I never thought life would lead me here, a woman in her mid-40s standing alone in a beautiful home, yet feeling more invisible than ever before. My husband was rarely around, his business trips growing longer each time. When he did come back, it felt more like he was checking a box than coming home. We barely spoke beyond surface-level conversations. Intimacy? That had faded into memory long ago. I kept the routine alive, cooking, cleaning, smiling politely at neighbors. But inside I was slowly disappearing. It was early spring when he told me he'd be away again, this time for almost a month. I nodded like I always did, saying nothing. I had grown used to this life, or at least I thought I had. A week after he left, my stepson Aiden came home from college for spring break. He was 22 now, tall, well-mannered, and always respectful. I'd helped raise him since he was a boy, and we'd always had a distant but cordial relationship. But something had shifted. His gaze held longer than it used to. His compliments felt warmer, more intentional. "You look beautiful today," he told me one morning in the kitchen. I laughed it off, but something inside me stirred. We started spending more time together, not deliberately but naturally. He helped with chores, cooked meals by my side, joined me for quiet evenings in front of the TV. I told myself it was innocent, but I could feel the shift. Every brush of his hand, every moment he stood just a bit too close, it all lingered longer than it should have. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the trees from the porch, he told me how much he admired my strength, how I kept the family grounded. I didn't know what to say. No one had said anything like that to me in years. His voice was soft, sincere, and it chipped away at the numbness I'd carried for so long. That night, I lay awake thinking about him, about what he'd said, how he looked at me, and how I hadn't pulled away. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that it was just loneliness playing tricks on me. But I knew better. Something inside me had shifted. When I saw him the next morning, his smile made me nervous. I wasn't just flattered, I was beginning to crave it. That feeling of being seen, of being wanted. Even if I knew it was wrong, it was the first time in so long that I actually felt alive. And that terrified me. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. The house was quiet, and the weather had taken a sudden, stormy turn. After dinner, the power went out. No lights, no distractions, only candlelight and the sound of rain. Aiden came into the living room with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might like this," he said, offering one with a small smile. I hesitated but took it. We sat quietly for a while, letting the rain fill the silence. The wine dulled my caution. We started talking, really talking. He shared how unsettled he'd felt lately, how coming home gave him comfort, how being around me made him feel calm. And then, softly, he said, "You don't even realize how amazing you are, do you?" I looked at him, startled, but he didn't break eye contact. "You deserve someone who sees you. Really sees you." My heart raced. I wanted to push the words away, to scold him, to remind us both of the line we shouldn't cross. But I didn't. Instead, I told him how invisible I'd felt. How it was like I'd slowly disappeared in my own home. He reached out, took my hand. I didn't move. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like something sacred, something long overdue. There was no urgency, no pressure. Just connection. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not just looked at, but seen. His presence filled a void I had stopped acknowledging, one my husband had left empty for far too long. When he leaned in, I should have pulled away. I didn't. Our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It wasn't rushed or impulsive. It was filled with all the unspoken words we didn't know how to say. And when it ended, the silence between us was louder than any storm outside. We both knew something had changed. And there was no going back. The boundary we crossed was one we could never undo. I stood up abruptly, my voice barely steady as I said I needed to get to bed. I left him there, sitting in silence, without offering a single word more. But sleep didn't come easily that night. My heart thudded violently in my chest while my mind spun in endless circles. I kept replaying the moment, the kiss, over and over. It hadn't been innocent. It hadn't been accidental. It wasn't just a stolen kiss, it was a betrayal. Not just of my husband, but of everything I believed I was: faithful, principled, strong. And yet, a part of me didn't feel regret. A part of me stirred with something that had been asleep for far too long. Something inside had been touched, not just physically but deeply, emotionally. I felt seen, awakened, as though I'd been living in black and white and suddenly someone had reminded me that color still existed. I couldn't justify it. I didn't want to. I just knew that after that moment, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Something had shifted inside of me, subtle, irreversible. The next morning, I avoided his gaze. I went through the motions, moving about the kitchen, making coffee, preparing breakfast, as if everything was perfectly normal. But I felt it. The way my skin prickled when he entered the room. The way silence stretched and filled the space like a heavy fog. Aiden walked in casually, like nothing unusual had happened, but I could sense the change in him. He was calmer, more self-assured, like he had stepped across a line and had no intention of stepping back. He offered to help with breakfast. I gave a small nod, never lifting my eyes. The tension between us simmered quietly. Neither of us spoke of what had happened. The kiss remained a silent presence in the room, unspoken but deafening. I kept repeating to myself that it had been just a lapse, a moment of weakness, that it didn't have to mean anything. But then his hand brushed against mine and I didn't flinch. When he reached over my shoulder for a plate, his body close behind mine, I didn't pull away. Instead, I felt something stir inside me, an electric mixture of shame and desire battling for control. Later that day I caught him watching me. His gaze wasn't casual, it was focused, intentional. He looked at me like I mattered. Like he was memorizing every line of my face, the way I moved, breathed, existed. That kind of attention I hadn't felt in years. My husband hadn't looked at me like that in what felt like forever. In fact, I wasn't sure if he ever really had. I knew it was wrong. I told myself to stop, to build walls, to create distance. I tried to re-establish boundaries, to tell Aiden that we had to end whatever this was becoming. He listened. He nodded. He even apologized. But the very next time we were alone, he leaned in close, his voice low and trembling with honesty. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me. He said I deserved more than this, more than being invisible in a marriage where even my tears went unnoticed. And somehow his words didn't feel like manipulation. They felt like the truth. Painful, piercing truth. Each time he spoke to me, I felt like I was being sewn back together, thread by thread, with words I didn't know I needed to hear. One night, he reached out and touched my face gently. He looked into my eyes and said, "You don't have to keep pretending. You're allowed to feel again." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The way I looked at him said everything. I had already crossed the emotional boundary a long time ago. What followed wasn't planned. It wasn't even deliberate. Just happened. As though all of it had been leading to that moment. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a woman pulled apart by guilt and longing, loyalty and loneliness. I convinced myself I could stop it. That I was in control. That I could walk away before it went too far. But the truth? I had already fallen. And even worse than the fear of being caught was the fear of what would happen when he left. When this break of his ended. When the borrowed time ran out. Would he walk away carrying the woman he awakened, leaving me to return to the version of myself I had abandoned? As the end of his break approached, the weight of what we had done became heavier. It showed in the quiet between us. In the way he looked at me now, still with longing but also with sadness. Aiden started packing. Each shirt folded, each item placed into his bag felt like a countdown. I felt my world tremble, shaking under the pressure of what was never meant to last. We didn't talk about the future. Neither of us dared to ask questions we didn't want the answers to. There were no promises. No illusions. I had spent too many years wrapped in false security with a man who barely noticed my pain. This, whatever it was between me and Aiden, was different. It was flawed, forbidden, but it was real. The night before he left, he came to me quietly. For the first time he seemed unsure. He didn't touch me. He didn't try to steal one last moment. He just looked at me, eyes filled with something between regret and affection. "I don't regret anything," he said softly. "But I don't want to ruin your life either." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. I didn't know if what I felt was heartbreak or relief. Maybe both. The next morning he walked out the door with barely a sound. No goodbye. No grand farewell. I stood there like a stranger, watching the only person who had really seen me walk out of my life. And just like that, it was over. The house was still again. Too still. The silence this time didn't bring peace. It brought emptiness. Days later my husband returned. He acted as if nothing had changed. He brought me little gifts, talked about his trip, shared office stories like he always did. He didn't see it. He didn't see me. Not really. He never had. He didn't notice that I avoided his touch. That my eyes stayed downcast. That something fundamental inside me had shifted. I had given myself, heart, body, soul, to someone else. And though the affair was over, the echo of it remained. I thought I'd be overwhelmed with guilt. But what I felt was something deeper. A sorrow for the years wasted, the self I had buried for a marriage that asked everything of me and gave back so little. Aiden sent one message before disappearing completely. Just 4 words, "Take care of yourself." I stared at it for hours before finally deleting it. We couldn't continue. I knew that. But I also knew that I couldn't go back to what I had before. That woman, the one who endured in silence, was gone. Now, I live each day beside a man who believes everything is fine, who doesn't see the hollowness in my eyes. The marriage remains on the surface untouched. But underneath, it's crumbling. And maybe that's the real punishment, not being discovered but carrying the truth alone. Carrying the memory of being seen, wanted, and then left behind. I learned something I can never unlearn, that love without attention becomes mere routine. And attention without commitment, no matter how intoxicating, is only temptation. Somewhere in the space between the two, I lost a version of myself I will never recover.